Welcome, everyone. This is, we're going to get a briefing on, as you see, the comparative analysis of benefits and compensation, the work that's been going on with our consultants from Deloitte, with the Human Resources Department. We have literally probably 1 hour max, because obviously we have a 4 o'clock budget meeting. So just alerting council members that if indeed we can revisit it again and we can rediscuss it again, but I just didn't want anyone to think that I was going to be arbitrarily cutting anyone off, because we've got to obviously start our budget meeting at 4. With that, introduce Veronica Frazier, who will introduce John and the folks from Deloitte, and the floor is yours. And both of those microphones work. There's one straight ahead of you sticking in the table. Can you see? Pull it up.
Hold up.
Right, so they could be if you need to. Veronica, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Council Member Stein. We appreciate the opportunity to be here. This afternoon, I have the Metro Human Resources has been working very diligently on developing our compensation, going through our compensation study and developing our pay plan. This afternoon, I have John Kennedy, who is on loan with us from Water Services, and many of you remember John is a longtime human resources employee who has had a great deal of experience developing Metro pay plans. Also, we have our consultants from Deloitte. To my right, I have Greg Stoskov, and he has been working on the cash compensation side. And also we have Greg Drennan from Deloitte, who has been spearheading the work on our benefit package. So I'm going to let Greg begin, and we're going
Veronica, before you do that, would you do one thing for us that I think you can do? Tell us where we are in the process within Metro with this study.
Okay. As you all recall, our mayor's state of Metro, we are working towards a 1% across the board increase that will begin in January through this study, and we will continue with the increments, our steps for employees who are on the step system, and that will begin in July. We will also have 2% compensation.
And I'm sorry, you misunderstood me. Where are we with the Civil Service Commission?
Okay, our Civil Service Commission passed the pay plan this morning.
Okay, thank you. That's where I didn't mean to cut you off, but I also didn't want you to get into the study. I was just curious, so the council would know indeed that that's where we are. Thank you.
We are here looking for the council's approval.
Okay.
Greg?
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Trying to get our page here. Oh, there it goes. Okay, great. Okay, good afternoon. To give you an overview of the compensation study that we completed, we put together this presentation. Basically, we were engaged by Metro Nashville to conduct a compensation study. As part of that study, we benchmarked 147 jobs using published survey data, and another 19 or so jobs using a custom survey approach, where we mailed questionnaires directly to other key comparator cities as defined by Metro and as reviewed by Deloitte. And so this covered about 4,000 employees, and we were in touch with 17 other city and county governments to get participation in the survey. The third bullet on this slide, overall the findings of this study were that base salaries and total compensation, total cash compensation, and total cash compensation is composed of base salary plus any type of annual cash incentive, Those were found to be within a range of plus or minus 10% of the market median, which is generally what we consider to be a competitive range. And that was based on the published survey data. When we looked at the custom survey data, again, that group of peer cities, we also found that base salaries were within plus or minus 10% of the median. So using both methodologies, we found that the salaries were within a competitive range. I will give you more detail as we go through the presentation on some of the specifics. In terms of Metro's health and welfare, their retirement and their leave benefits, they're approximately 20% more valuable than the averages for peers and the broader public sector market for government employees. And when you look at benefits for public safety employees, they're about 10% more valuable than the peers, as the public safety market's a little richer than the broader public sector market. So overall, we felt that Metro's compensation and benefits package is somewhat above competitive levels. We also did review the pay study conducted by Metro for the mayor, for the vice mayor, and for the council members, and provided a letter indicating that the methodology used was appropriate and it was in line with leading practice. That report is going to be presented in more detail once it's formally presented and salary recommendations are made to the Civil Service Commission. Giving a little background on the study. To start out, we did some stakeholder interviews, as we do almost all the time when we do studies like this. And so we talked to key leaders, stakeholders within Metro to get their perspective on several elements of working at Metro, and that included those areas highlighted on the left in the circles. We talked about organizational culture, strengths and challenges of the current compensation program, what should be the potential strategy going forward for both benefits and compensation, and also any ideas around potential plan design improvements. And you can see on the right of the slide, there's a list of all the departments that were represented in the interviews. So it was a group of about 20 different departments that were represented in the interviews that we conducted. So the next slide, which is up now, shows some of the themes that we heard that came out of these meetings. One of the first themes was that Metro offers an attractive culture. It's a place described as where people want to work, where they enjoy working. Their responsibilities are high, but there is a family-oriented, collaborative, dedicated culture. At the same time, we did hear that many employees feel they're worked hard. Some use the word overworked. As far as ability to compete with the market, the benefits are rich, but employees said they feel like pay is below the market median. And again, these are opinions, not necessarily facts, but opinions, which is what we get in interviews. The low pay has the potential to become a retention issue, as some of Metro's top talent could be recruited elsewhere if salaries offered are higher. And the market for talent was viewed as mostly a local market in terms of where Metro hires from. In terms of ability to recruit top talent, there were some concerns that the low compensation and the limited training makes it difficult for Metro, especially to hire younger, newer talent. It's often difficult to find candidates also who have an appropriate combination of experience and functional skills. And the last theme that we heard was around consistency, and in some cases the lack of consistency, because you have two groups of employees. You have one group that is on what we call open ranges, and then you have another on salary structures that have a step approach to the structure. So sometimes the pay programs are administered differently based on whether you're in open ranges or on a step system. So that has led to some pay discrepancies between departments for similar positions. And also there's been budgetary constraints which really prevented Metro from implementing the pay system as it was originally intended. So going on to more detail in terms of the compensation analysis. As I said, we had a sample of 147 jobs that we benchmarked against published surveys. We tried to choose jobs that were a cross-section of the organization and that represented highly populated jobs, so we did benchmark about 4,000 employees to market. For base salary as well as total cash, we found that the pay does approximate the 50th percentile for the all organization and government market data. There are some employees, however, that are below the median, and those are called out here in a summary fashion in this chart on the slide. So you can see that in the chart, the first line shows base market index. So that's how base compares to the market at the 50th percentile. So the column there that says all organizations, the base market index is 1.05. That means that base salaries compared to all organizations is 5% above the market 50th percentile, or 5% above 100. With 100 being market median. Compared to the government sector only, it's at 108 for base salary, so a little higher compared to the government peer group. And then for total cash compensation, it remains very consistent. So at 106 for total cash for all organizations and 108 for total cash for government. So what that essentially says is that within the comparator groups we use, there's very little use of any additional incentives like annual incentives or bonuses or that type of compensation, because base is very similar to total cash. The number of jobs benchmarked, 147 for both these samples. And then the last two columns show you the percentage of employees below the market index, so below the 50th percentile. And so you can see that for base it's 38.5, for all organizations, and base salary it's 38.5. For government it's 32.4. And the numbers stay the same, again, for very similar for total cash compensation. So just to give an idea of where people sit within the salary ranges. If we look at just going a little further into the data, you'll see this next chart shows different job types. So the competitive levels broken out by job type. So in this chart, the first column shows the job type, so correctional officers, emergency, telecommunications, health department, public safety, standard schedule, trades, TG, TL, and TS. And so the next column shows you the number of employees that were in the sample. And then the columns after that show how Metro compares to the market for all organizations, again being more of a general industry cut that would include some private as well as public sector organizations, and then the government column, which would be only governmental organizations. And so any of the rows that are white fall within a plus or minus 10% of the median. And so we did not highlight those because we typically consider that to be competitive with the market if you're within plus or minus 10%. The columns that are highlighted, and they don't show up quite as well here on the screen, but the emergency telecommunications and public safety both came out above the 10% above market. They were actually in the 119, 121, or so, 117, range of pay above the market. So a little higher level of pay there. And then the health department, where we only benchmarked one position, and that one position was somewhat below the market. So that shows up as an outlier that's more than 20% below the market. If we go to the next slide, this slide shows how the different job groups compared to the compared to the custom survey. So the jobs that were included in the custom survey: correctional officers, public safety, and some standard range positions. And you'll see there's the average salary for Metro, the peer group percentiles, which would be the base, 25th, 50th, and 75th, and then the variance. So you can see that the variance here at the 50th percentile is within a very close range of 50th percentile. It's minus 3.1 for correctional officers, minus 5.2 for public safety, and minus 3.0 for standard range. So very close correlation between the pay, actual pay at Metro and the market data that we gathered for this group of jobs. Going on to some of the other data that we collected in the custom survey, so we asked a few questions about what we would call compensation practices or policies. And one of the questions we asked was, what cost containment measures have you taken within the last 12 months? To get a sense for what other organizations are doing. Certainly the last 3 to 5 years following the recession have been an unusual time for pay both in the public and the private sector, and we wanted to get a sense of where things are today. And so of the 8 organizations that responded to this question, we had 4 that indicated there was a reduction in force, 1 indicated a pay freeze, and 2 indicated they had made a hiring freeze. So those, and I believe that's 7 total respondents. So those would be the actions that other organizations have taken within the last 12 months or so. And we're contrasting that in each case with what Metro's done. So the last bullet there under key findings in the middle of the page, Metro has not taken any cost containment measures or reduction in the last 12 months. And then at the bottom of the page, you have what pay increase measures, not cost reduction, but increase measures were taken in the last 12 months. And we had 1 organization showing in the columns to the right that granted an employee bonus, and 6 organizations that gave pay increases. And the pay increases reported by the organization range from 2 to 3%, with 4 organizations indicating a 2.0% increase, and 3 organizations saying they'd not provided any pay increases in the last 12 months. By contrast, Metro offered a 1.5% structure increase last year, and approximately 3% pay increases for employees on steps, as well as open ranges.
You trying to get to my slide?
Yeah, I am, yeah. Okay. So going on, the average actual merit in terms of the participants, we received data from 3 participants. It was 2.7% for the actual merit that was given in 2013. That compares with 1.5% structure adjustment that Metro gave associated with a pay increase on January 1st, as well as employees on steps that received a 3% pay increase, and some employees received 1.5% if they were on the open range. And then in terms of cost of living, actual cost of living percentage for 2013 was 2%. That reflected responses from 3 participants. Metro's cost of living was slightly less at 1.5%. So that's a summary of some of the compensation practices, thank you. Some of the compensation practices that were occurring in the survey participants that we polled in the study.
Okay. Am I hot here?
Give me get closer.
Yeah. Lean in.
Yeah.
You can speak right, the one in front of you works. Just pull it a little closer to you.
Here we go. Thank you. Okay. So just to level set where we are, we've covered the gist of our compensation study. We're also we've got a slide here on benefits, and then we have a couple of slides to talk about the proposal before, that will be before the council, and what we're going to do in a longer-term perspective on compensation. And first, I would just like to commend Metro Human Resources for commissioning a study not only on compensation, but also looking at the total package inclusive of Metro's benefits, because I believe it's a significant part of the value to your employees. And I think it's going to be helpful as Metro begins to shape its compensation philosophy moving forward. So on this benefit slide, I think the best approach is just to kind of explain to you what the chart shows. And there in the yellow or the faded shaded area really sums up the entire study. And by the way, this one slide is backed up by an entire report, and this executive summary is backed up by a substantial report as well, and all that's made available to you all on the website, I believe. But looking to the far right of this chart, what you see there is for general government employees, the bars on the left and right. One is for Metro's peer group that we surveyed, and the other is public sector in general. And you see both of those are Metro's right at 20% above those for general government employees. So the bar at the 100 would be at market. So anything above the bar, above the 100 shows that Metro is above market. And then anything below that 100 would show that Metro would be below market. And you see in all cases, Metro is above market here. So about 20% public sector for general government. If you looked at the private sector, which we did, Metro's benefits are about 50% more valuable. And I'll mention this also. It's an employer-provided value, so we're only looking at employer contributions to benefits, about 50% more valuable than the private sector. And then to the far right, you see public safety or fire and police. We did not compare fire and police to the private sector. We did not believe it would be applicable. But looking at public safety against other public sector entities for like positions, against the peers and the public sector in general, Metro is about 10% above market. Okay? And then the rest of the chart sort of shows you how you get to that point. The first set of bars is related to your health, essentially your health benefits for active employees. You see for public sector, which is on the first and third bars there, slightly above market. But I think that this shows the benefit board is doing a good job of keeping those at least close to market. Now on the retirement is really what's driving this, and this includes both pension benefits and retiree medical benefits. And really what's happening here is a lot of public sector entities, your comparison group, the peer group, what you see is they've made changes for new employees, and this really compares against those new changes. Another thing that is driving this is that many of the public sector entities continue to have employee contributions to the benefits. And since we only measured the employer component, Metro is significantly higher on the retirement side. So you see those bars are almost off the graph. The one versus the private sector is off the graph at 376 versus 100 to the market. So significantly above market, as you might expect in the private sector. And then you see all retirement for public safety, which is about 20% better than market. And then we also looked at leave benefits, which were only slightly better than market. All right, these are the immediate next steps that Veronica started to talk about earlier. Do you want to touch on these? Or?
Sure. So as we say, Veronica did mention these. Immediately, Metro will continue with the regular step increments. There will be a 1% COLA across the board increase on January 1st, 2015, 2% for employees on open ranges effective January 1st, 2015, and then a 3% market adjustment for employees who are more than 20% below the market rate, in addition to the steps in the COLA, and that would be January 2015 as well. And then there is a new rate for the public defender of $148,505, which would be effective on September 1st, 2014.
And let me just clarify, most of those are all pending council approval in this budget.
Yes.
Those are the proposed next steps that are included in the mayor's budget, correct, Mr. Riebling? Correct. Thank you. Sorry. Just wanted to make sure that everybody was with you.
Okay, and then longer-term next steps, we are discussing after a decision on the short term. For long term, it's proposed that there would be a further analysis of the compensation program. First of all, looking at job documentation to ensure the job descriptions are accurate, and then looking at those job descriptions to see if there's any opportunity for consolidation. And the purpose of that is to streamline the administrative process to make sure that we don't have unnecessary duplication of job titles or job descriptions, so really streamlining the number of classifications. And then after that, looking at some additional benchmarks in jobs which are viewed as key jobs, and also to give us more data to take on the next step, which would be looking at the salary structures themselves and making decisions about whether the structures should be updated or adjusted further in the future. And then looking at conducting a final analysis to make sure we have both internal and external equity and competitiveness, and then looking at a plan for implementing any of those proposed changes. So this would be potential next steps after the short term.
Thank you. You all willing for questions? Members of the council, we have about 25 minutes. Councilman Tigert, you're recognized.
Thank you. At some point, will you provide us both this and a little bit more detail?
Roseanne is making a copy of that. It'll be available in the council office, yes.
I'm curious about the 17 cities that Nashville compared against. I'd like to see that list, obviously. You mentioned attracting the inability to attract top talent based on our pay scales and whatnot. Is that evident in all departments across the board or just selective departments?
I think it was more in selected departments.
Such as?
I think first one that comes to mind is information technology. Those type of jobs, it tends to be very competitive with the private sector to get top talent for people right out of school that are going into that field. I'd say that's one example. Probably finance might be another area. So,
will your report detail some of these areas?
I believe it does. Yeah.
Okay. And then final question, your potential next steps, do any of those potential next steps include further study of defined contribution packages for Metro? Are they tasked with studying that?
Mr. Riebling, you want to pick up my...
I don't think they need to be tasked. I mean, that's their charge, is to, whenever you appoint a study and formulating committee, it's pretty open-ended in terms of, there was a specific request as it relates to partner benefits, but other than that, it's open-ended to what areas they want to go into. And I believe Chairman Schmerling is starting to move them in that direction.
Do they need any push from this body or anybody else to make sure that that is at least on the table for discussion?
I mean, it was a discussion at the last study and formulating committee meeting. So and they've asked for an update of all the recommendations and proposals that were presented before the committee last time, including the costing of all those. So they've asked for that information. So I don't know if they need any encouragement. I think they are moving in that direction to look at all that.
Okay, thank you.
Councilman Bedney.
Thank you. I'm back here. Did you find that the diversity on the pool of employees and management of Metro matches the diversity of Nashville? We didn't really study that. Okay, so you don't have any recommendations on how to, by reformulating this, we can improve the diversity or consider the diversity of our workforce in Metro? I think that's just a different topic and another study. It was not something that we looked at specifically. So there is nothing on, I just want to make sure, there's nothing on the study that deals with the lack of diversity or not in Metro?
No, and just to your point, if you go out and look at all of the reports that back up this executive summary, there's nothing involved in that includes the diversity of Metro's population. It just wasn't part of the scope.
The reason I'm asking is, for example, you were talking about job descriptions, and there are ways in you can write a job description that will put a limit on perhaps some employees that have the know-how and experience, but they don't have the necessary accreditation. So if you are not going to consider diversity as you are engaging in making recommendations, that's going to perhaps hinder us taking advantage of the pool of capable people in Nashville that could be working for Metro. All right.
That was just simply not part of what they were requested to do in this study.
Okay, thank you.
Councilman Claiborne.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For just a question for general information, is this compensation study, was it to include the requests that we made for the council and the mayor, the vice mayor, or is that another plan or another study, or is this something, another part B to this?
It did, and when is that information coming?
I think the plan was to keep that outside of the budget process, but that early, as soon as the budget process is over, that information's available and ready for the council to take whatever action it wants on it.
Okay, so they did study it, but it's just not ready to be rolled out
What
yet.
they did is basically ratified, I'm not sure that's the right word, that the work that was done a few years ago was valid, and I think what the recommendation from HR will be is that essentially that those positions be given an increase starting with the next term that's commensurate with sort of the rate of inflation, kind of a cost of living increase going forward.
Okay. I'm just trying to clarify because I thought we had made a request.
Yeah, the information was, I believe, sent out, wasn't it? Or, yeah, the information was sent to the council, but the legislation to do so, it was going to wait until after the budget process. Right, because it doesn't start until the next.
Right.
Right, so the idea was let's don't get caught up in all that right now. We got enough to do right now without getting into that, and let's get into that issue come July, August, September.
Okay.
But I thought the information had been sent out already.
I don't remember getting it, but that doesn't mean it didn't come. I mean, they're...
I understand.
Thank you.
We'll make sure it gets to you.
Councilman Weiner.
Thank you, Chair. When you're looking at streamlining job duties and descriptions, are you looking at how technology might impact those duties?
We haven't discussed that topic at great length yet, but I think in my experience with other projects, anytime you're looking at streamlining, that would be part of it in today's world. I mean, that's to me, it's a reality of the jobs and streamlining.
So we can expect to see that in the upcoming reports that you do?
If we're engaged to do that, yes.
Thank you.
Councilwoman Gilmore.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted more clarity about you showed one slide that said we were on benchmark like 35 to 36% below, or I just needed more clarity on that, if you could provide that.
Sure. So that showed that there were a group of employees that I would think it was 38% or 37% that are below the median. So that means they could be 1% below, they could be 10%. There's a few that were 20%. And so that was really just to give an idea of who fell below the median. The caveat to that is we always say that there's different places around the median that are appropriate. So some employees who are newer to the job it's very appropriate for them to be, say, at the 25th percentile, which is even lower than the median. Some employees who are very experienced or high performers or long-term employees may be well above the median. So, yes, that was put in there so you could get an idea of, in terms of the market, who's below median, but I wouldn't assume that all employees below median are underpaid per se. And that's why we also have spent time, and I know the Metro HR has been spending time looking at those employees that are more than 20% below the market to determine what could be done to bring them closer to market.
Also, do you look at the jobs, is that detailed in the executive summary, those jobs of those 38% of people?
Yes, well, there's a lot more detail there's a full report and then there's an executive summary, so. Yeah, I believe it's in by job title.
Okay, so it provides an explanation of who those particular people are in the
Job
demographics.
titles, yeah.
Okay,
And that would be in the full report.
Yes.
And the full report is online?
That's my understanding.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Councilwoman Berry.
Thank you, Chair. I'm over here. A quick question. You clearly did two different studies, one on compensation and one on benefits. As part of the executive summary, is there a component that actually marries the two together to then give a comprehensive overview of compensation and benefits and how that relates to our peer cities and what that looks like versus us versus the private sector, et cetera? Because oftentimes compensation and benefits are a package. Is that something that you all have?
I think it plays more into the compensation philosophy and the direction that Metro would want to go. Like, for example, you may have a philosophy that says we want to be at 20% of the market, however you define the market, on benefits. However, on compensation, you'll hear Mr. Stoskov describe 90 to 110%. You may want to be a little less than that and be higher on the benefit side. I think it helps you determine that philosophy going forward.
So then, again, back to the question, I don't think you guys actually address a philosophy in your report, is that correct?
Not in this report.
Okay.
Right.
Thank you.
Councilwoman Allen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This kind of goes back to the range question. If our average is 90, within the plus or minus 10% of where we want to be, is there another measure that shows how our range compares? Is our average good because highly paid employees push it up there and the lower paid employees are lagging far behind? Or is there something that shows how our range compares with other peer cities' ranges?
And do you mean by range, do you mean the actual pay?
I suppose I do.
I guess I would answer that by saying, we looked at how your actual pay compares to the median. And then since we delivered that report, the Metro HR has been going through the details, again, the detailed report, looking at job by job and actually person by person, how people compare to that market data and identifying individuals that would warrant to receive some type of market adjustment.
Okay.
So I always say the devil's in the details.
Right.
Because the averages, are just that, they're averages.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Councilman Gilmore.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was hoping, too, that you could speak a little bit more to young people and coming in, and you had said something about that. And then Council Lady Winter had touched up on technology. But then when we talk about young people's space and the type of jobs that they will have, that, like how we look at it now, we usually come into a facility and maybe some of those things not being, they may work from remote places or something like that. Is that looked at, how the jobs will look in the future in terms of government and young people?
We didn't really get into that level of detail. We really stuck to compensation and how pay for various jobs compares to the market. I think your question is very relevant, and we talk more and more today about total rewards, the whole package, which we actually say total rewards includes compensation, benefits, the career opportunities that the organization offers, the culture that the organization has, and the work environment, whether I can work at my home or where I have to come into the office, or if it's a mixture. So again, I think that's a very relevant question. It just wasn't within the scope of this. This was more contained to compensation.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Obviously, the relevant parts of this to our budget process, we will talk about in more detail in terms of the specifics of those proposals from the mayor and the finance director. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, HR. Thank you, members of the council. Budget and finance will convene at 4 o'clock on the nose. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.